I sat in the car for another couple of hours, barely moving, just listening to the Radio 1 sad country song after another. From afar, I watched the police officers come and go, removing evidence from the room and from the cars. The small crowd from the two hotels quickly dispersed as the commotion subsided. Eventually, a couple of tow trucks showed up, and both cars were hauled away in a tow truck. I reflected on the events of the past 2 weeks and thought about how much my life had changed in that short period of time. Finally, after the last police officers had left, I started the car and drove to Gino's. Once inside, I grabbed a beer and collapsed in a booth. About 10 minutes later, Trev came in from work and sat down at the table. He looked at me soberly and finally said, "You're here, not in jail, so it went as planned. But you don't seem happy about it." I recounted everything that happened that night and what I had seen. He shook his head and said nothing. Finally, after a few minutes, I said, "I'm trying to come to terms with the fact that it's really over. On one hand, I'm glad, but on the other hand, I feel so incredibly lost. 2 weeks ago, I knew what I had and where my life was going. Now I don't know anything." Trev just patted my hand and didn't say anything. We finished our beers and got up to leave. Trev asked, "Are you ready for your acting job?" I nodded. "I'm not looking forward to it, but I'm as ready as I'll ever be." Trev smiled sadly and said, "Break a leg." We exchanged keys again and I got in my truck and drove home. I pulled into the driveway and parked behind Donna's car. As I approached the house, I took a deep breath and walked inside. I was greeted on the doorstep by a very excited babysitter. "Mr. Colville! I thought you were Mrs. Colville." "Hi, Christy, isn't Donna here?" I said, feigning surprise. She shook her head. "She left around 7 and said she'd be home at 1 o'clock or 30. It's not like her to be late." "Donna and Josie must have gone somewhere after dinner and forgot the time. Or maybe she's at Josie's house," I suggested. Now it was Christy's turn to look surprised. But it wasn't Josie or Mary who took Mrs. Colville. It was a woman named Connie who came to pick her up. "Are you sure? She told me she was having dinner with Josie tonight." Christy nodded. "I'm sure her name was Connie. She comes in here sometimes after she brings Mrs. Colville home Friday night. And I recognized her car when she pulled up tonight." "I only know one Connie, and I can't believe she could have gone anywhere with her," I said slowly. Christy looked uncomfortable. "I don't know anything about it, but she's been bringing Mrs. Colville home the last few Fridays I've been babysitting." She looked at her watch. "But it's 2 o'clock now and I have to go home." "I'm sorry, Christy, I didn't mean to keep you. I'll call Josie and deal with it. How much do I owe you?" We agreed, and I walked her to the door and thanked her for looking after Sam. Watching her walk down the street, I hoped I sounded convincing. Back in the kitchen, I pulled out my notebook and looked up Josie's number. I knew she'd be pissed if she got a call this late, but I needed to give myself an alibi. After about 6 rings, a very sleepy voice said, "Hello? Josie? This is Ken Colville." "Ken? What time is it?" "It's about 2:30, Josie. I'm sorry to wake you up, but I thought Donna might be there. But she's not home yet." "Ken, I haven't seen Donna since we got home from work." But she said she was going to meet you and Mary for dinner?" "Ken, we haven't gone out to dinner on a Friday night in months." "What? That can't be true." "Well, it is. A couple months ago, she wanted to move our dinner to the beginning of the week. She said she met an old neighborhood friend who wanted to take her out. We haven't been out on Friday nights since." "Damn. Thanks, Josie. Sorry to bother you so late." I hung up the phone and thought for a moment. I picked up the phone book and dialed the city police department. The dispatcher called me and said he was concerned that my wife wasn't coming home. As I expected, he said there was nothing that could be done unless she had been missing for 24 hours, in which case I could file a missing persons report. I mentioned her name several times to be sure he would remember it. After about 15 minutes, I let him convince me to hang up, and, if she was still missing after 24 hours, to call back. For several minutes, I sat in the darkened kitchen holding the phone and thinking. Finally, I decided I'd better get some sleep. I knew that in a few hours, all sorts of crap would start flying, and I needed to be ready for it. I got dressed and went to Sam's room to check on her. She was sound asleep with a smile on her face. She was probably having pleasant dreams that only the young and truly innocent are capable of. How I envied her. As I looked at my girl, a lump rose in my throat and a burning sensation appeared in my eyes. I realized I didn't want to be alone. I climbed into bed with her, and when she turned to me and opened her eyes sleepily, I said, "It's just Daddy, honey. Go back to sleep." "Daddy," she whispered. She closed her eyes, snuggled against my shoulder, and passed out again. I lay there staring into the darkness until a door closed in my mind. I snapped out of a fitful sleep at the sound of the phone ringing in our bedroom at the end of the hallway. I looked at the clock. It was a little after 8. I sat up, carefully removed Sam from my arm, swung my legs off the bed, and almost ran to the phone. "Hello?" "Ken, it's Jack. What's going on with Donna?" He practically shouted into the receiver. Jack was Donna's father. Jack and Brenda, Donna's mother, lived in a small town about 20 miles away. He had been retired for several years now. On a small pension, Social Security, and their savings, they managed to survive. Once retired, they decided to move from the Upper Peninsula to upstate to be closer to the medical care Brenda needed because of her diabetes and blood pressure problems. I liked Jack and Brenda from the beginning, and we always got along well. They always tried to see Sam as often as possible and spoiled her the way only loving grandparents can. Their son still lived in California with his wife and 2 grandchildren, so Sam got most of their attention. I knew this was going to be especially hard for them right now. "Jack, Donna was gone when I got home from work. The babysitter said she had to be home at least an hour before. I called the girlfriend she was supposed to be out with, but she hadn't seen her. I even called the police. Ken, she just called here. She was almost hysterical and wouldn't stop crying. She kept saying, 'It's a mistake, it's a mistake,' over and over again. I was finally able to get her to tell me that she was in the Eaton County Jail. She couldn't or wouldn't tell me why. And she wouldn't answer me when I asked if she had called you." "What the hell? Jack, she didn't call me. I'll get dressed and go over there. Can you and Brenda watch Sam for me?" "Yeah, sure. Whatever you need, Ken." As I hung up the phone, I heard a noise outside the door. I turned around, and there stood Sam with a plush puppy clutched to her chest. "Daddy, where's Mommy?" she said. After thinking for a moment, I replied, "Mommy had to leave for work early this morning, sweetie. How would you feel about visiting Grandpa Jack and Grandma Bren this morning?" She thought for a bit and said, "Okay, but can I have breakfast first?" "Sure, honey. We'll both have breakfast. How about it?" We ate and got dressed pretty quickly. I loaded Sam into the car, and we headed over to Jack and Brenda's house. Both of them met us at the door, hugging each other desperately. Brenda was pale, and her eyes were red and swollen. She had clearly been crying. "Ken, what's going on? Donna can't be where she said she was, can she?" I just shook my head, as Jack took Sam in his arms and squeezed her. "I don't know what's going on, Brenda. All I know is that she wasn't with the person she said she was going out with last night. And from what the babysitter said, it wasn't the first time." Jack sat Sam down and told her, "Sam, I think there's a donut with sprinkles on the kitchen table for you. Why don't you go and have a look?" "Okay, Grandpa." And Sam trotted out of the living room and into the kitchen. Jack turned to me and said, "Ken, did you two have a problem?" I kept the puzzled look on my face and shook my head again. "Not that I know of, Jack. Donna has been acting a little strange and out of sorts the last few weeks. But we talked about it, and she said she was just tired of the schedule we've been keeping." "Why? Didn't she say anything to you?" Brenda and Jack looked at each other, and then Jack said, "Ken, we haven't seen her, or even talked to her hardly at all for almost a month. She hasn't called us, and if we have called her, she's excused herself and said she's too busy to talk. And it's really frustrating to us that in all that time, she never brought Sam back once. And that's not like her either." I nodded slowly and said, "Let me drive down there and find out what happened. I'll call you or bring her here." I turned and walked out the door, Jack walking right behind me. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Thanks, Ken. I'd go with you, but right now I'm afraid to leave Brenda alone. I think her blood pressure is spiking, and I had a hard time getting her to stop crying after Donna called." "I understand, Jack. Just take care of both of them, and I'll be back here as soon as I can." I got in the car and hit the road. The county jail was right next to the county courthouse, about 20 miles away. I had driven by it many times over the years, but never had the opportunity to go inside. Fortunately, there were several signs directing me to the visitor's entrance. Inside was a waiting area that was nearly empty, except for the front desk where several uniformed officers were working at tables. On the counter hung a sign instructing visitors to check in, and next to it was a clipboard. As I reached for a pen, one of the officers looked up and said, "May I help you?" Even though I was expecting this, I was confused and couldn't think of what to say in response. Finally, I said, "I think you are keeping my wife here. She called my father-in-law this morning. We don't know why." She asked rudely, "What's her name?" Donna Colville." She opened the folder lying in front of her and flipped through some papers. Without looking at me, she said, "Yes, she's here." She turned to another officer and asked, "Who's handling yesterday's holdup at the Red Roof Inn?" "Detectives Williams and Prescott," the second officer replied. The first officer picked up the phone and dialed the number. She turned away, saying something into the receiver. She hung up the phone and turned to me. "Have a seat, Detective Williams is here to pick you up." I sat staring at the floor for about 10 minutes until a man in plain clothes came out of an armored door at the back of the building and looked at me. He looked to be about 40, shorter than me, but stocky. He had a competent look. He approached me and said, "I'm Detective Williams. Are you Donna Colville's husband?" Yes. Is she all right? What's going on? Why is she here?" "Let's go in my office," he said, and pointed down the hallway. I followed him down the hallway and walked through a door labeled Detectives. We were the only people in a room with 4 desks with chairs and many file cabinets scattered around the walls. He closed the door behind me, pointed to a chair next to one of the desks, and said, "Have a seat. Let me see your driver's license, please." I held out my ID to him, and he opened a folder on his desk and compared what looked like a photocopy of Donna's license to it. He nodded and handed it back to me. "Mr. Colville, I'm sorry to inform you that your wife was arrested last night during a drug bust at the Red Roof Inn on Forest Road." I tried to feign embarrassment and disbelief. "What? No, there must be some mistake." "There's no mistake, Mr. Colville. Following a tip about an impending drug purchase, the Tri-County Drug Task Force raided a specific hotel room. A large quantity of illegal items were seized in the room as well as in 2 automobiles belonging to the occupants of that room. 2 weapons were also found during the search." I leaned back in my chair and looked completely dumbfounded. Detective Williams looked at me sympathetically for a while and then said, "I have read the officers' affidavits and can tell you in general terms what they observed and what they will testify to. Would you like to know? I must warn you that what you hear may shock you." I stared at him for a moment and, without saying anything, nodded my head in agreement. "So, upon entering the room, the officer saw 2 males and 2 Caucasian females. Drugs were openly present on them. One of the male suspects resisted arrest and assaulted one of the officers. He was subdued and all 4 were arrested and brought here. When he finished, I bent over in my chair, covered my eyes with my hands and repeated in a whisper, 'No. This can't be happening.' Excuse me, Mr. Colville, but I need to ask you some questions." I looked at him over my fingertips. To my surprise, there were actually tears in my eyes, and it wasn't an act. Hearing his words brought back the emotional shock and disorientation I'd experienced when I first learned of Donna's betrayal. "Mr. Colville, you can't be forced to testify against your wife, but perhaps you would like to add something to what we know?" I shook my head from side to side. I don't understand it. I just don't understand it. We have a 4-year-old daughter. How? How could she do this? How could she? I said, as tears ran down my face. You didn't know your wife was involved with drugs or had a drug problem. I looked up at him and shook my head. We never had a problem with them. The only time we experimented with marijuana was over 4 years ago. And that's when she said she didn't like it. We haven't tried it again. I hesitated for a few seconds. But wait, I remember something. One night, about 6 or 7 months ago, I came home from work and my wife was visiting that evening. She was in the bathroom, and she was nauseous and vomiting. She was out with an old neighbor of ours named Connie. She admitted that she smoked a joint with her that night. We had a big fight about it, and she said she'd never go out with her again. I saw the detective's eyes go wide when I mentioned Connie's name. Take that bitch, I thought. The detective hesitated for a moment and finally said, Mr. Colville, your wife is going to need a lawyer. The court hearing will be Monday morning from 10 to 11. If she does not have an attorney, one will be appointed to represent her. Bail will be set at arraignment. I pulled out a handkerchief and wiped my eyes. I nodded. Can I get a copy of the arrest report and what she is charged with? He nodded. Yes, I'll make you a copy. Can you tell me who she was arrested with? I can't officially, but I should warn you that a reporter was present at the scene of the arrest, and it may appear in the paper in the next day or two. He may even have the names of those involved, though they can't be released until charges are filed. He took the folder and left the room. A couple minutes later, he returned and handed me some copies. I started reading the form until I got to the list of charges and stopped. I looked at him with a shocked expression on my face. Is this right? Can it be right? He nodded soberly. As far as we know, some charges can be dropped or added at the time of arraignment or during pretrial proceedings. That will depend on the prosecutor who prosecutes the case. I went over the charges one more time. Felony drug possession with intent to deliver, possession of drug paraphernalia, and solicitation. I took a deep breath. Incitement? You mean prostitution, don't you? What the hell, Dammer? Dammer! Angrily, I said. I stood up and headed for the door. I stopped and looked at him. Are we done? I need to get out of here. He looked at me soberly. You want to see her? Visiting hours start at 11. I pounced on him. No, I don't want to see her. Not after what she did to me, and not after what she did to our daughter. He nodded understandingly. The arraignment will take place in Judge Brown's court. Afterward, my partner and I may want to ask you some questions. In the meantime, try to stay calm, okay? I turned and walked out the door. As I drove back to my in-laws' house, I felt uneasy about telling them about this and how they would react. I walked in the door and saw Samantha, Jack, and Brenda sitting on the couch watching TV. Sam saw me and said, Hi, Daddy. We're watching cartoons. I can see that, sweetie. I need to talk to Grandpa for a minute, and then we should go home, okay? Sam just nodded and went back to whatever she was watching. I showed Jack my head toward the kitchen. He stood up and followed me. What is it, Ken? Where's Donna? Why didn't you bring her home? I didn't say anything, just handed him a copy of the arrest report. When he read it, he turned visibly pale and collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs. He looked at me pleadingly. This has to be wrong. It's not Donna. I shook my head dejectedly. It gets worse, Jack. I can only tell you what the detective told me, and what the officers at the scene will confirm. I took a deep breath and repeated. Officers entered the room and saw 2 males and 2 females. A quantity of prohibited items were openly found in the room. One of the males resisted arrest and assaulted one of the officers. He was subdued, and all 4 were arrested. Jack's mouth fell open. Tears sprang from his eyes, and a groan like that of a wounded animal escaped from deep within his chest. He covered his face and cried. I waited silently for him to recover enough to wipe his eyes and try to catch his breath. Jack, Donna and the others will appear in court Monday morning around 10 o'clock. Nothing can be done until then. Jack looked up at me. Have you seen her? Have you seen Donna? I shook my head and said grimly, Jack, I don't want to see her right now, and I certainly don't want to talk to her. I need to go home and think about all of this. I need to think about what's best for Samantha. Jack hung his head, covered his eyes with his hands, and his whole body shook. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, I'll leave it to you to tell Brenda. I'm sorry, Jack. I'm sorry for all of us. Jack just looked at me and nodded. There were tears in both of our eyes. He stood up and followed me out into the living room. Come on, Sam. Kiss your grandparents goodbye. It's time to go. I heard Brenda sigh and turned to see what was wrong. She was looking at Jack like he was a stranger. He seemed to have aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. She walked over to him and looked into his eyes, and he just wrapped his arms around her and pulled her tightly against him. I picked Sam up and they followed us to the exit. I turned to them before getting in the car. I'll call you if I hear anything. Jack only nodded and grabbed Brenda's hand. As we were pulling away, Sam looked out the window and asked, Dad, why are Grandpa Jack and Grandma Bren sad? I thought about that question for a minute and wondered if it was time to start getting her ready. Well, honey, we just found out that Mommy isn't feeling well. So she's going to stay for a few days in some place that will make her feel better. That's why they're sad. Sam sat in her car seat in the back seat, and I watched in the rearview mirror as she was starting to get the hang of it. But Daddy, I don't want Mommy to leave. I want to see her, she said with tears in her eyes. You will, honey, as soon as she gets better. But we have to be patient. Do you know what that means? Sam began to cry quietly and repeated, But I want my Mommy. I want my Daddy. Please? I bit my lip and desperately thought of ways to distract her. Sam? Do you want to go to the lake to Grandpa and Grandma Colville's? We can stay the night? Sam stopped crying for a moment and thought for a moment. Still snorting, she asked, Can I go swimming? Sam, it's probably too cold for swimming, but you can swim in the lake if you want. It wasn't the middle of May yet, and the lake was probably too cold for her. Can I ride the tunnel? I'm sure Grandpa will ride you on the pontoon if you want to, I assured her. Excited, she said, Okay, let's go to Grandma and Grandpa's. When we got home, I told Sam to get clothes and toys to take with her, and I helped her pack. While she was doing that, I sat down at the phone and called up north. When Dad answered, I asked him if he and Mom wanted some company since I wasn't working today, and I thought we could drive up there. Hell yeah. Your brother is coming over in the morning to help us launch the docks and boats, ours and Harvey's next door. We could use your help. I assured him we'd be there in a couple hours and hung up. I packed my overnight bag, then helped Sam pack it. I smiled as she optimistically included a swimsuit in the bag. Just in case, Daddy, she said cheerfully. Sam was fast asleep in her car seat as we began the 130-mile trip. In the silence, I had plenty of time to think and prepare to break the news to Mom and Dad. They had always been close to Donna, ever since the three of us returned from Germany. And since my parents had never had daughters, they cared for Donna and my brother's wife, Sandra, almost as much as they cared for their grandchildren. They probably took the news as hard as her own parents did. It was the middle of the afternoon when we pulled up to the house. Dad was fiddling in the garage, and Mom was raking the inevitable pine needles from the trees surrounding the house. They both came over and greeted us as Sam jumped out of the car screaming, Grandma! Grandma! Daddy! They both hugged and kissed her until she finally couldn't stand it anymore and tore down the side of the house toward the lake and beach. They both turned to me, and Mom asked accusingly, Where's Donna? I grabbed my suitcases and said grimly, Let's go inside and I'll tell you all about it. We sat on the front porch, from where we could watch Sam throw rocks into the water and poke them in the sand. I told them everything that had happened since the evening, about going home to babysit, about Jack's call in the morning, about going to the jail and listening to the detective. Mom and Dad were shocked. And if I wasn't their son, I think Dad would have called me an outright liar. Finally, I pulled the arrest report out of my bag and showed it to them. Mom read it with tears in her eyes. Ken, this can't be true. You don't believe it, do you? Donna would never do that. Daddy said, It's not like Donna. Are they sure that's what happened? I nodded. The detective seemed sure, and he even said there was a reporter present during the arrest. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. How could she do that? Jack and Brenda must be absolutely devastated, said Mom, stood up and crying, ran into the house. We sat in silence for about 10 minutes until Mom came back into the room, wiping her eyes with a tissue. She suggested that Sam go up and help her with dinner, and Dad and I go for a walk. She knew that I always talked to Dad when I had a problem or needed to make a decision. I knew he would tell her everything later, but that's what we always did. I yelled to Sam and Dad, and I walked out into the backyard and down the dirt road. He asked me what I was thinking. I told him that if all of this is true, and it looks like it is, then I can't trust Donna anymore. And I certainly can't trust her to be there for Sam. And what she did hurt me so badly that I couldn't imagine getting over it. The only way out was divorce, and I thought it would be best if I put some distance between us and her. I told him that I had graduated a semester early and was being handed my diploma. He smiled warmly and congratulated me. I just nodded and said that, all things considered, it was a bittersweet accomplishment. Anyway, I sent out over 100 resumes and applications all over the state. It was likely that I would be able to find a job away from our hometown. I figured the farther away the better. We talked about other things for a while. Their house in Florida, the possibility of an addition to the house here on the lake, my brother and his family. Finally, he told me that he and my mom had decided to give up their apartment in the city. It was too expensive, and they really couldn't afford to keep the house on the lake, the apartment in the city, and the two-family house in a retirement park in Florida. I nodded when he said that. My brother and I often wondered why they even bothered trying. Finally, our walk ended at the house. But before we entered the house, Dad stopped and said, Whatever you decide to do with Donna, make sure you do it for the right reasons. I know you loved her. Maybe you still do. You know we don't believe in divorce only as a last resort, but your mom and I will support you. Is there anything we can do to help you and Samantha? When he said that, I started to gasp again. Thank you, Dad. Could you and Mom keep Sam for me this week? I have a lot to take care of with all of this, and I have to keep working until I find another job. Sure, son, I'll talk to your mom. I'm sure she'll be as happy to have Sam around as I am. We spent the rest of the evening eating dinner, visiting and playing games with Sam. We avoided talking about Donna, and by the time Sam went to bed, I was exhausted. I hadn't gotten much sleep the night before, and I was emotionally exhausted. I headed to bed, having warned Dad that we had to start work at 9 the next morning. At 8, I was already up and eating breakfast when Harvey stopped by to see me. Harvey was in his 70s and had owned the cottage next door for over 30 years. His wife had passed away a couple years before that. He now divided his time between the cottage and the homes of his 3 married children. Only one of his children, his oldest son, still lived in Michigan, and he himself had 2 college-age children. Until a couple years ago, the 2 grandchildren, a girl and a boy, could be seen here almost every weekend. They were out with friends, swimming, water skiing, and just having a great time. I called them kids, but really they were only 5 or 6 years younger than Donna and me. But as both of them got more and more involved with their college studies, they pretty much stopped coming to the lake. Harvey was a friendly old geezer. He and his wife had been close to Mom and Dad for years. He sat down with a cup of coffee, and we chatted for a while. Dad and Mom bragged about me getting my engineering degree from Michigan State University. He congratulated me and then informed me that his granddaughter Casey was graduating from Grand Valley next week. Can you believe it? She's getting a degree in kinesiology. I can hardly pronounce that word, much less write it. He laughed. Yeah, she wants to spend some time here this summer while she looks for a job. She hasn't been here much the last couple years and she misses the lake. She's afraid that when she starts working, she won't have that opportunity for a long time. About this time, my brother John showed up with his daughter Elaine, who was a year older than Sam. Sandra stayed home with the younger one as John was only coming for the day. Elaine happily went to Sam's room to get her up. Dad, John, Harvey, and I set to work. Once the four of us got to work, the job went pretty quickly. By lunchtime, we had the docks built. After a short break, we borrowed a pontoon trailer from a neighbor down the road and launched both pontoons, Dad's and Harvey's. Finally, we put Harvey's speedboat and Dad's fishing boat in. Sam and Elaine couldn't wait to get on the pontoon. At the end of the day, we loaded everyone onto the pontoon and took a short walk around our part of the lake. I was pleasantly exhausted, but I managed to put Donna out of my mind for most of the day. At one point, I did have to explain to John what was going on. After he got over the initial shock, we agreed to meet for lunch later in the week and talk some more. I suggested that Sam stay at the lake with her grandparents. At first, she was worried that she would miss preschool, but I assured her that I would call the school and they wouldn't mind if she missed a week. After a quick dinner, I packed up my things and said goodbye to everyone. I hugged and kissed Sam and told her to be good for her grandparents. I assured her that I would call her every day and that Grandpa would bring her home on Friday. As I drove home, I reflected on the fact that I was more calm than I had been in weeks. Mentally, I was relieved that with Sam taken care of, I could focus on getting some resolution to the situation. I arrived home at dusk. I gathered the Saturday mail and Sunday paper from the porch and put them on the kitchen table. I glanced at the answering machine in the room where the message light was blinking. There were 3 messages there. Trevor had called and wanted to know how I was doing. Jack called and asked me to call him back. The third call was from Donna. When I realized whose barely audible voice it was, my heart raced. She said weakly, Ken, where are you?" I could hear her struggling to suppress a sob, and her voice shook. "Ken, please take me away from here. This is a mistake. I don't know what you think, but it's not true. Dad barely talks to me, and Mom won't come to the phone. I don't know who else to call. Please?" She started to cry openly, and then the call cut off. I froze for a moment, trying to go back to that moment, to bring back the anger and hatred I felt just last Friday night. Mostly I was just sad and bitter. I picked up the phone and called Jack. When he answered, I said, "Jack, it's Ken. How's Brenda?" In a tired, dull voice, he said, "Ken, I tried to call you, but you weren't home." "I know. I decided to take Sam to the lake to see Mom and Dad. I just got back. They're going to keep Sam at their place for this week." "Brenda's in the hospital, Ken. I took her to the ER yesterday. After I told her everything you told me, her blood pressure went dangerously high. She's probably having an emotional breakdown too. The doctor said she needs to be kept under sedation and observation for a couple days." "Damn it. I'm sorry, Jack. I hope she's going to be okay." "Me too, Ken. But I wanted to tell you that Donna called again early this morning. I could barely stand to talk to her. I didn't know what to say. She did that to her mother, and now I can't forgive her for it. In the end, I just hung up the phone." "Yeah, I know, Jack. She left a message on our answering machine, too. Begged me to come and get her out of there. Claimed it was all a mistake." I hesitated for a moment. "I'm planning on going to the arraignment tomorrow. How about you?" I said, "I think I need to go back to the hospital in the morning. If Brenda sees me, it will help calm her down." "Okay, I'll call you tomorrow afternoon or stop by the hospital before I leave for work and let you know what's going on. Tell Brenda I said hi, okay?" "I will. Thanks, Ken." Hanging up the phone, I quickly went through the mail. There were several envelopes from the engineering firms I had applied to. I opened them and flipped through the letters. One said they had no current openings but would keep my resume on file. The other said to contact the employment agency they use to fill vacancies when they come up. No good, I thought. I turned on the TV and opened the Sunday paper. To the sound of the TV, I sleepily flipped through the pages and half-heartedly browsed the news. Suddenly, I woke up. At the bottom of the front page of the Metro section was an article headlined, Major Drug Raid on the East Side. It took up several columns and continued on the inside page. There were two photos on the inside page. One showed the back half of a Lincoln Town car with the trunk open, with two officers rummaging around in it. In the background could be seen the open door of a hotel room and one of the beds with linen scattered on it. Another picture showed a handcuffed man being put into a police car. From the profile and the fact that he was walking by himself, I realized it was James. The article said that two suspects, a man and a woman, were taken into custody, and that the state attorney's office was very interested in the fact that one of the male suspects was a state corrections officer. A large amount of drugs were seized in cars belonging to the two suspects. A gun and a knife were also found in the room. The suspects were expected to be arraigned Monday. And underneath the photos, in addition to the journalist's autograph, was Dennis Thompson's autograph. I paused, contemplating it. I knew from previous interactions with him that although he worked for free, he had an office in the newspaper building. I thought it would be helpful to pay him a visit first thing the next day. The last thing I did before going to bed was to call Trevor back. When he answered, I quickly brought him up to speed and told him about everything that had happened over the weekend. We talked a bit about how it all affected her parents and my parents. I told him that I planned to be at work all week as Sam would be taken care of. I was about to hang up when he said he had some news too. He had received a letter from General Motors saying that his apprenticeship program would begin in 2 weeks. I congratulated him and told him that no one deserves it more. And I meant it. Trevor was a good guy, hardworking and smart, too smart to spend his life on an assembly line. The next morning, I was up early. By 8, I was on the phone with the office of the divorce attorney I had called the previous week. I was lucky and was able to make an appointment for the afternoon. By 8:30, I was standing outside Dennis Thompson's office in the newspaper building and knocked on his door. He opened the door and said without any warmth, "Yes, what do you need?" He was a couple years younger than me, tall and thin. His appearance was somewhat unkempt, as if he didn't care much for his appearance. "Mr. Thompson, my name is Ken Colville. I'd like to talk to you about the pictures you published in Sunday's paper about the drug bust." "Yes? Come in. Have we met before? You look familiar to me." Trying to speak a little louder than usual, I replied, "I don't think so." "Okay, so what are you interested in?" "My wife is Donna Colville. She was one of the women arrested at that motel." That statement got his undivided attention. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "Yeah, I'm sure you are. I'm filing for divorce." "Judging from the pictures in the paper and the detective's comment, I assume you have other pictures that my divorce attorney might want to see." "Yes, there are other pictures. But why should I provide them to you?" I decided to take the direct approach and see what he would do. "Look, Mr. Thompson, I'll pay you $500 for a set of any photographs you may have, and I'll sign an agreement that they are for my personal use in any lawsuit I may be involved in and will not be published anywhere." He thought for a moment. "Like I said, why should I provide them to you? Wouldn't you rather have my attorney call you and the pictures to the divorce hearing? That way you'll get the money and won't have to worry." He stared at me for a moment, then laughed. "Yeah, you're probably right." He reached for the stack of manila envelopes on the corner of the desk and started going through them. Finally, he found the one he was looking for and held it out to me across the table. Then he reached into the file drawer under the desk and pulled out a couple of printed sheets. "There are 2 sets of 5x7 sheets here. I must warn you that some of them are quite graphic. Look through them and see if they're what you're looking for while I fill out the standard contract forms. Oh, and you can write me a check for $550. 500 for the rights to the photographs and 50 for the prints. You give me back the prints and I'll give you back the 50. Deal?" I only snorted at him, since I was sure he knew the prints would never be returned. I carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photos. Quickly flipping through them, I felt my throat constrict and suddenly felt dizzy. "Yes, this is what I need, and I recognize the other woman," I said in almost a whisper, tucking them back into the envelope. He stopped writing for a moment and looked at me intently. You didn't know anything about this, did you? Are the kids involved too? I didn't answer anything, just nodded. He shook his head and said, I moonlight as a private investigator from time to time. It's amazing how painful it can be when a man or woman finds out their spouse isn't who they say they are. With shaky hands, I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a check. We both signed the contracts, a copy for each of us, and I handed him the money. Taking the check, he said, Thanks, I couldn't use most of these pictures anyway. They're too graphic and too likely to be sued if I did. I nodded. I can offer you a few more cases. Another woman has 2 ex-husbands who would also like custody of their children. I'll let them know about it, and I bet they'd be willing to pay you for copies. As I was about to leave, he stood up and held out his hand and one of his business cards to me. I wish you luck with your divorce. With these pictures, there should be no custody issues. Without another word, I turned and walked out. I arrived at the courthouse well before 10. I wandered around until I found Judge Brown's courtroom. About a dozen people were already waiting there, and I found a seat in the back of the hall. The benches were gradually filling up with relatives and friends of the defendants, lawyers, and a few police officers. I recognized Detective Williams, who stood at the door, and another man who entered alone and sat down by the aisle. I puzzled over it for a long time until it came to me that this was Connie's first husband. I had seen him a couple of times a few years ago when we lived next door to her. I made a mental note to try to catch him before he left. The judge and bailiff came in and announced the first case. A steady stream of prisoners in orange jumpsuits under escort appeared before the judge one by one to read the charges and plead guilty. Some prisoners were handcuffed, some were not. The judge would review the arrest file and read the prosecutor's recommendations. He would then set bail and a court date, after which the prisoners would be escorted out just as quickly. Then the next group was brought in. The third group of inmates were brought in by Donna, Connie, Curtis, and James. Curtis and James were handcuffed. Curtis was walking, limping, with a bandage on his nose. He looked angry and belligerent. James stared at the floor most of the time, sullen and depressed. Donna and Connie looked just awful. Hair unkept, no makeup, eyes red and puffy, and obvious wrinkles on their faces from exertion. They were both looking around, as if hoping to find someone they knew. I tried to stay behind the one ahead of me so she wouldn't notice me. I saw her shoulders slump as she decided she was alone. Curtis was called in first. The charge that was read out had all the drug-related counts, as well as resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. The lawyer standing next to him pleaded not guilty, and the judge set bail at $100,000 and set a date for next month. James was called in next, and the charges were read to him, including all the drug charges and another charge I didn't quite make out. A man stood up and introduced himself as the district attorney. He and the attorney representing James approached the bench. After a few words with the judge, both attorneys stepped back. The defense attorney pleaded not guilty. The judge set bail at $200,000 and said a trial date would be set later. I gathered from the resulting murmur of conversation that the bail amount must have been something unusual. Connie was called in next. The usual drug charges were read to her and an incitement charge was added. Connie pleaded not guilty and bail was set at $25,000. Donna was called in next, and when she stood up to plead guilty, tears streamed down her face and her attorney had to hold her hand to keep her upright. So badly was she shaking. The same charges were read again, including solicitation. The lawyer found her not guilty and her bail was set at $25,000, the same as Connie's. The 4 of them were led away and Donna never looked up again. I stood up and headed down the aisle as the next group was led into the hall. I remembered that Connie's ex-husband's name was Mark. I called out to him as he walked out the door. He stopped and turned around. You probably don't remember me. I'm Ken Colville, Donna's husband, I said. Yeah, I think I remember. It's a hell of a thing, isn't it? He said. I just shook my head in agreement. I have an appointment with a divorce lawyer this afternoon, but I wanted to catch you. I remember a while back you tried to get custody of your son, right? Yes, but never got anywhere in court. But I think this will help. He smiled humorlessly. I think so. Here's the business card of the photographer who took the bust pictures. They'll make your custody dispute a win-win. It'll cost you a few bucks, but it'll be worth it. You might want to let Connie's other ex know about it too. The pictures are that bad, aren't they? Or maybe I should say good. Yes, I'll let him know. Thanks. As I turned to leave, Detective Williams touched my arm. Mr. Colville? I stopped and looked at him. Oh, hi. How are you? Brenda! Do you have a few minutes to talk to me and my partner? He was polite, but I got the impression that the request was rather directive. Internally, I sighed and thought I could get this over with. I said, sure. Let's go to one of the interrogation rooms. I just nodded and followed him into the sheriff's building. He introduced me to his partner, and we sat down at a table that had a stack of folders on it. He opened one of them and then said, I have a couple questions I need to ask you to help our investigation. You have the right to have an attorney present if you wish. Well, I don't have one yet, but I'm meeting with a divorce attorney this afternoon. Is there some reason I need one? You're filing for divorce? Hell yes. I met with the photographer this morning. He showed me the rest of the pictures. He even sold me a set. Can you live with that? I said bitterly. He looked at me sympathetically, but ignored my question. Tell you what, if you feel uncomfortable asking questions, tell me and we'll stop until you can get a lawyer. Is that okay with you? Yes, of course. I tried not to worry. I'd been preparing for this, knowing that at some point someone would want me to tell them what I knew. Do you know Connie Wilkerson? Yes, we were neighbors for a while. I haven't seen her since we moved out of that townhouse complex a couple years ago. Did you know your wife was seeing her regularly? No, I told you on Saturday that I knew she was seeing her that one time. She told me she wouldn't see her again. It's obvious now that she lied to me. I take it you weren't friends with Connie? I snorted. You're right, she's a bitch and a slut. But apparently my wife is too, so they're in good company. I then proceeded to tell him the story of our friends John and Tracy and her involvement in the destruction of their marriage. How he caught her in bed with another man after he moved in with her. I also told him how she had neglected her children and used them against her ex-husbands. He nodded and then asked, Have you ever heard of Curtis Halleck or James Martin? Until this morning's court hearing, no. But as it turns out, I have a couple good pictures of them, said I ironically. Donna never mentioned them? No, what was she going to say? Thought you might be interested to know that I was having fun with a man named Curtis Halleck, I replied sarcastically. He ignored my comment and asked, Are you familiar with a nightclub called the Black and Tan? Of course, everyone in this part of the state knows the Black and Tan. Is that where they hooked up? He shrugged. We think so. We have a witness who testified that they've been there several times in the last month. I just shook my head in bewilderment. I know I asked you on Saturday, but I have to ask you again. Were you aware of your wife's involvement with drugs? No, sir, not the slightest idea. I guess that makes me kind of stupid, doesn't it? We had a pretty hectic schedule last semester. I was attending MSU almost full-time to get my degree and working nights 6 days a week at an assembly plant. Donna was working 30 hours a week at the hospital and caring for our 4-year-old. After the holidays, we only spent time together on Saturdays and Sundays. No change in behavior or attendance problems at work? I haven't heard anything about her work, but I've noticed that she's been out of sorts the last couple months, and her parents have noted it too. Now I know why. But when I asked her about it, she said that the schedule we keep stresses her out, but she can handle it. Okay, I think that's all the questions for today. Here's my business card in case you remember anything. And thank you for your cooperation. Can I ask you a question about bail? Someone will have to bail her out. How does that work? He handed me a list of bail bondsmen in the area and explained that bail could be posted for 10% of the bail amount in cash. Once the bail was posted at the jail, she would be released in about an hour. As I drove away, I thought the interview had gone very well and felt very relieved. I decided that I had better see Jack and Brenda before I met with the lawyer. Upon arriving at the hospital, I made my way to Brenda's room. When I entered, it appeared that Brenda was asleep and Jack was sitting next to the bed. He stood up, put his fingers to his lips, and walked to the door. We went outside and I asked, "How is she?" "Good, good. Her blood pressure's back to what it should be. They're going to discharge her in the morning. The doctor is going to keep her on antidepressants for a while." "How did it go in court?" "The charges were read. Her attorney pleaded not guilty. Bail was set at $25,000. It lasted only 10 minutes. She called again early this morning. She almost became hysterical when I told her her mother was in the hospital. She said she misses you and Sam and doesn't understand why you don't call her back and come see her. She asked if anyone was coming to the court hearing. I said I had to be in the hospital, but someone would probably come. She begged for someone to come and get her out of there. I told her we'd see what we could do." "Yeah, she looked pretty bad this morning," I said without any sympathy. Jack looked at me sadly. "What are you going to do, Ken? Are you going to bail her out?" I looked Jack in the eye and said, "Jack, I can't let her anywhere near Sam or me right now. I have an appointment with an attorney this afternoon to see what my options are." "Is it really that bad, Ken? Don't you have any doubts left?" said Jack with annoyance. "Did you see the article in the Sunday paper?" He nodded affirmatively. "I went to the photographer this morning. There are other pictures in there, candid pictures. Photos that, as Donna's father, I hope you never have to see. Photos that, as her husband, I can never get out of my mind." "There is no question of cheating. None," said I firmly. Jack wiped his eyes and said, "Okay, Ken, I understand. The value of the bail is $2,500. If you need help, I'll give it to you. As for where she goes when she gets out, I don't really care. Maybe she'll move in with Connie, the other woman involved in all this. I think she'll have the kids taken away from her soon, so she'll have a place to go." No, I'll talk to Brenda when she wakes up. I'm sure no matter how hard it is for her, she'll still want her to move in with us. One thing about being a parent, even if you disagree with or are appalled by their behavior, even of an adult child, you still have to love and support them." He said this with sadness. When we looked at each other, I was surprised that we both had tears coming to our eyes. "I want you to know, Jack, you and Brenda can see Samantha anytime you want. I don't want it to change your relationship in any way. And ours too. I've always thought a lot of you and Brenda." He nodded and we hugged. As he quickly turned and walked back to the hospital room, I could clearly hear him trying to hold back sobs. I slowly walked away, shaking my head at how much suffering Donna had caused. My meeting with the lawyer in the afternoon went about as I expected. I explained the circumstances, provided him with a copy of the arrest report and photos. I told him that my first priority was to get custody of Samantha, and I wanted to keep Donna away from Sam for as long as possible. I didn't care about the settlement. He said he could file divorce papers the next morning on the grounds of adultery and also seek an injunction against Donna as an unfit parent who was a danger to the child. He felt there should be no problem with the arrest and photos. I asked him to call me when the papers were ready and I would pick them up. I wanted to give them to Donna myself. When I got home late that night, the phone rang and I picked it up. It was Mary. "Ken, it's Mary. Donna didn't show up for work today and hasn't called. What's wrong?" "Donna's in jail, Mary," I said without emotion. "What?" she said incredulously. "You didn't mishear, Mary. She's in the Eaton County Jail." "What? Why?" "Did you see the Sunday paper about the drug bust at the Red Roof Inn Friday night?" "I didn't read it, but I heard something about it." "She was one of the 4 arrested that night." I heard Mary give a shocked sigh. "So I don't think she'll be at work for a while." But that can't be true. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to do what I have to do. I'm sure she'll contact the hospital as soon as she's released on bail." "Ken, I'm so sorry." "Yeah, me too." And I hung up the phone. That evening I went to work as usual. Trev and I talked for a while and brought each other up to speed. When I got home from work, I wandered aimlessly around the house, thinking about how much had changed in just 3 days. For the first time since Thursday night, I was sleeping in my own bed, alone, and I realized it was time I got used to it. This was the way it was supposed to be. I'd been married for almost 5 years and hadn't slept apart from Donna since I left the army. On Tuesday, I got up and started on my to-do list. I got Donna's luggage and a few boxes out of the basement and started packing her things. All of her clothes, shoes, and toiletries I packed and put in the trunk of her car. All of her things on hangers I pulled out of the closet and spread them out in the back seat. Just as I was finishing up, the phone rang. When I answered it, it was a reporter from the local TV station asking if Donna Colville lived here. I replied that she didn't and hung up. Just then the phone rang again, and it was the same man. He insisted it was the number of Donna Colville, who had been arrested the previous Friday night. I asked how he knew that, and he said it was in today's paper. I told him there was no one here by that name and hung up again. I hadn't picked up the newspaper from the porch yet this morning. I figured I'd better find out what was in store for me. On page 2 was a continuation of the arrest story, including sketches of the arrestees. The article detailed the arraignment and emphasized the connection between Curtis and James and the drug problem at the Ionia jail. I almost dropped the paper when I read that the street value of the drugs seized totaled over $100,000. I thought, damn, Curtis must have loaded his Lincoln with some serious weight. I decided to put changing my phone number on my list of things to do today. On the advice of my lawyer, I grabbed my checkbook and savings books and headed to our bank branch. I opened a separate individual checking account for myself and transferred half of the money from our joint accounts into it. I then withdrew my name from the joint accounts. On the way home, I stopped by the post office and applied to change Donna's address to her parents' address. I also stopped by the phone company office and filled out an application for a new phone number in my name only. When I got home, the phone was already ringing, and the answering machine message queue was full. I quickly went through them. Most of them were from reporters, except for 3. One was from the hospital, asking me to call back to check on Donna's condition, and the second was from Jack, who informed me that Brenda had been released from the hospital and that they were already home. The last was from an attorney who said he was representing Donna and wanted to talk to me about her case. I called Jack and asked if everything was okay. When he assured me that everything was fine, I told him I wanted to drive Donna's car with her belongings and hoped he could give me a ride home. Unfortunately, he agreed, and that would give us a chance to talk. I told him I would be there soon. I made a few more calls, canceling joint credit cards and making a couple new ones in my name only. I called the landlord, talked to him about getting Donna off the lease, and made an appointment for later in the week. By the time I got to my in-laws' house, it was the middle of the afternoon. The 3 of us hugged. Brenda put her head on my chest and cried. I patted her shoulder and told her I felt the same way. Jack and I unloaded Donna's things and stacked them in the spare room. I gave him her mail and bank accounts and asked him to hold them for her. As we were driving back to my house, I said, "I'm filing for divorce, Jack. I've decided I can't live like this anymore." "Yeah, I realized that when you left yesterday," he said sadly. "I called the bail bondsman today. I have an appointment to pick up the bail tomorrow at 11. Jack, I wish I could go with you to the jail to pick her up. It's my responsibility to tell her what's going to happen. I don't want her to have any doubts left, and I don't want you to have to deal with that," I said firmly. "Sure, Ken. I think it's going to be a hell of a day for all of us." He sighed. We drove the rest of the way in silence, each immersed in our own thoughts. As we got out of the car, I told him I planned to meet him around noon at the jail, and he agreed. I called the attorney's office and arranged to pick up the divorce papers the next day. I then called up north to talk to Sam and my parents. I brought my father up to speed and asked how Sam was doing. He said she was having a great time, but when it came time to go to bed, she missed me and my mom. "Well then, put her on the phone. I miss her too." "Daddy?" Is that you? Hi, Sam. Are you having fun? Uh-huh. Grandma and Daddy and Grandma and Mommy took me to ride the tunnel again. That's great, kiddo. Daddy, is Mommy there? Can I talk to her? Mommy's not here, Sam, but she's feeling better. I miss Mommy. Can you get her to call me on the phone so I can tell her about the tunnel ride and everything? Sure, Sam, I said, my heart breaking. We talked for a few more minutes, after which she decided she needed to go back to the dock to see what Grandpa was doing. As I hung up the phone, I shuddered to think of what would happen when she realized she wouldn't see her mother for a long time. Going to work, I encountered another unpleasantness. The story in the newspaper had gotten a lot of publicity, and I was bombarded with questions from friends and coworkers. When it was finally lunchtime, I told Trev I couldn't take it anymore. He nodded and said, "Let's go to the foreman." I explained the situation, and the foreman said it was okay to take the rest of the shift off. I thanked him, and Trev walked me to the gate. You know, Trev, there's one thing I don't understand. The paper said the street value of the drugs they found was over 100 grand. Where did that come from? He laughed. You know, sometimes the strangest things happen. From what I heard on the street, apparently they were really doing drugs that night. Looking around, I asked, "Are there any rumors about what really happened that night?" No, neither James nor Curtis are out on bail yet. But I've heard that Curtis thinks his soon-to-be ex-wife may have had something to do with it. I left him at the gate and told him I'd probably see him tomorrow. As I sat at home and stupidly watched TV, my thoughts continued to run in circles. I knew that the next day I would have to see Donna, probably for the last time. The woman I loved more than anyone in the world. The person I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. Now I hated her for ruining that future and leaving all of our lives in ruins. I couldn't forgive her for the pain she had caused our daughter. Pain to the point that her life may never be the same. And when I thought about Samantha, doubt crept into my head. Had I done the right thing? Could I have stepped back from the brink and tried to hold the situation together for Sam's sake? Would years of suffering have been better for me than the pain we both had to endure now? Eventually, I got up, found a couple sleeping pills, swallowed them, and went to bed. The next morning, I went to the lawyer's office to pick up the papers. He talked to me for a few minutes to explain some of the details. He said that when the judge saw the pictures, he wouldn't hesitate to sign the restraining order. But he wanted to warn me that I couldn't keep Donna away from our daughter forever. At some point, unless she goes completely broke and burns out, the court will eventually allow her presence in her life. I nodded and said I would accept that when the time came. I thanked him and he said he would contact me as soon as he knew the court date. I pulled up to the jail just before noon. Jack and Brenda were already sitting in the waiting room waiting for me. Jack presented his bond to one of the officers who looked it over and said it would take about an hour to process. He said that Donna would be brought to interview room C if we wanted to wait for her there. Jack, Brenda, I'd like to talk to Donna alone. When I'm done, you can take her home. Is that okay with you? Jack and Brenda looked at each other sadly. Sure, Ken. We'll wait here, said Jack. The officer led me through the security doors, down the hallway, and into the interrogation room. We'll bring her downstairs once she's changed, he said. I just nodded and put my papers on the table. I paced around the room thinking about what I should say to her. I was startled by the sudden opening of the door. I turned around and Donna and I were standing there looking at each other. Donna looked just awful. Her hair was gathered in a ponytail. No makeup. She looked haggard. She was wearing some slutty clothes I'd never seen before. Clothes she must have had with her the night she was arrested. A tight, low-cut blouse, a miniskirt, and high-heeled shoes. When she realized who was in the room, she screamed, Ken, you've come! Oh God, please take me home! Staggering, she walked over to me, threw herself into my arms, and began sobbing uncontrollably. I stood there, unmoving, preparing myself for what I had to do. I lowered her arms from my neck and said, Hold on, Donna. Sit down. We need to talk. She looked up at me through her tears, blinking and perplexed as I pushed her into a chair and sat across from her. But Ken, can't we just go home? She pleaded, grabbing my hands. Donna, don't you have something to tell me about why you're here? Said I nonchalantly. Ken, please. I don't know how the drugs ended up in my purse or in my car. You have to believe me. She cried. Maybe I do, Donna. But don't you have anything to say about who you were with and what you were doing in that motel room? I said slowly. Donna turned even paler, pulled her hands out of mine, wrapped her arms around herself, and trembled. Ken, I don't know what they told you, but it's not true. It's all a mistake. Please, it was just a mistake. She whispered. Donna, don't lie to me. I know about Connie and James and Curtis, and I know about Black and Tan, I said quietly. Donna began to shake and cry. Please, Ken, just take me home. It's a lie. It's all a lie. Really, Donna? Really? I reached into the manila envelope I had with me, pulled out 4 5x7 photos from the dozen I had bought, and placed them in front of her, one by one. The photographs were arranged in the order in which they were taken. The first one was taken above the heads of the officers breaking down the door. The last picture showed Curtis lying face down on the ground with 2 officers holding him down and handcuffing him. James appeared to be unmoving and standing with his hands in the air. Connie and Donna stood with their backs against the far wall, holding their hands in front of their faces. Donna looked at the pictures, then at me and turned away. Oh my God, get them away, get them away! She screamed hysterically and cried. At that moment, the door opened and an officer peeked into the room. Are you all right? Yes, officer. I'm almost done, said I grimly. He gave Donna a hard look, then closed the door. While I waited patiently for Donna's crying to subside into violent, shuddering sobs, I gathered up the pictures and put them away. Finally, she turned to me again with tears streaming down her face and a lost, hunted look. After seeing the pictures again, I had no sympathy for her. Please, please, I want to go home, she pleaded. Yes, Donna, you're going home, but not to my house. You don't live there anymore. Your mom and dad are here, and they'll take you to their house. My biggest regret is that they'll have to see the whore you've turned into. She looked at me shocked. I reached into the envelope and pulled out some papers. I placed the first packet in front of her. This is a petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Appropriate, don't you think? I placed the second packet of papers in front of her. And this is a restraining order requiring you to stay away from me, our home, and Samantha. I'm told the judge couldn't sign it fast enough when he saw your artistic photo shoot, I said bitterly. Donna looked at me in utter bewilderment. She tried to say something, but it came out completely unintelligible. I got up to leave before she finally spoke. She desperately reached out to stop me. Oh my God, Ken, I love you, I really do. Please don't do this. Please don't take Samantha away from me. She sobbed. I angrily shook off her hands. Damn you, Donna! It's always all about you, isn't it? I took a deep breath. What about me, Donna? I loved you with everything I had. Didn't that mean anything to you? What about Sam? Didn't her love mean nothing to you? You broke both our hearts. And now I have to explain to a precious 4-year-old girl who loves you with all her heart and soul why she can't see her mommy. When I finished speaking, tears were streaming down my cheeks. And you know what, Donna? The only thing I would want to know is why? Why did you do that? But seeing you like this, I don't think you can tell me why, can you? Donna sank down in her chair, folded her hands in front of her face, and sobbed. I just stood there the longest. Tears dripped uncontrollably onto my shirt. Finally, I said brokenly, You know what the saddest thing is? The saddest part is that the house in the country that we were going to build together, and the little brother we were going to give Samantha. I paused, and Donna just stared at me with empty eyes, stunned. That's never going to happen, I said quietly. I turned and walked out the door and down the hall. Jack and Brenda were standing at the end of the hallway waiting. When they saw my face and heard Donna's heartbreaking sobs behind me, tears came to their eyes and ran down their faces. We hugged in silence, and I turned and walked out the door to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives. Next part? I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, holding my newborn son in my arms. I stared in wonder at his dark hair, wrinkled face, and the tiny fists he clutched next to his tightly closed eyes. I looked in awe at my exhausted wife holding the same bundle in her arms. Even as tired as she was, she looked at me with pride and love. Samantha sat as close as she could on the other side of her and smiled from ear to ear. Smiling so hard I thought her face was about to crack. "Sam, have you ever seen anything so beautiful in your life?" I asked in surprise. Sam giggled and replied, "Oh, Daddy, Mommy, my wish came true. Twice." As I sat and admired my amazing family, my thoughts returned to how different my future seemed just 18 months ago. I walked out of the county jail that May Day, mentally and emotionally exhausted, but determined to start my life over. That week, the responses to my job applications turned into a flood. Out of that flood, perhaps a dozen invited me to call back and schedule an interview. I started scheduling appointments as quickly as I could. Out of that handful, I received 3 job offers. The one I enjoyed the most was a job with the County Road Commission in the Traverse City area. The man I interviewed with, Don Fineout, was a Vietnam veteran and former combat engineer. We had a lot in common, and I thought we would really get along. The money wasn't as good as other offers, but it was 150 miles from home and only 30 miles from Dad and Mom's house on the lake. After the interview and on the way back home, I stopped to talk to Mom and Dad and spend the night. Sam was still staying with them. It was better that way, given my traveling around looking for work and the fact that I was still working nights at the auto plant. As always, the first thing Sam did when she jumped into my arms was ask about her mom and when she would be able to see her again. "Hopefully soon, Sam. Mom is starting to feel better, and as soon as the doctor says she's okay, she'll come see you. I promise," said I guiltily. "I miss her, Daddy. Tell her for me, please," she said with tears in her eyes. "Of course, honey," said I, hugging her tightly. "And Grandma helped me make a get well card for her." "Will you give it to her too?" said Sam as Mom looked at me sadly over her head. "Of course I will, Samantha. Now tell me about everything you did at the lake," said I, trying to distract her. She proceeded to tell me about going fishing with her grandfather and Harvey next door, helping her grandmother get the house ready for guests over Memorial Day weekend, and taking a speedboat ride with Harvey and Harvey's granddaughter Casey. She talked about Harvey's granddaughter like she was her new best friend. Mom laughed and said that she had become very good friends. They were inseparable on those days when Casey wasn't busy looking for a job. Later, Mom told me that she felt like Sam was replacing Casey as her mother, but Casey didn't seem to mind. I thought about it and hoped Sam wasn't giving me any trouble. I hadn't seen Casey in years and didn't know how she felt about kids. That night at dinner, we discussed my job offer. I told Mom and Dad that I really liked the person I would be working for, and I thought the job would be interesting. The only thing I was confused about was finding a place to live and whether there would be any divorce or custody issues because of it. Dad looked at Mom, and she smiled back at him and said, "I know what you're thinking, and I think it's a great idea." I looked puzzled, and Dad laughed. He said, "How about this? You and Sam move in with us, at least until we leave for Florida in the fall. That will give you time to get settled in the area and find something to buy or rent. And we'll get Samantha for the whole summer." "Are you sure?" I asked hesitantly. "We have plenty of room. It only gets crowded on weekends when John and Sandra and the kids come to visit. And this way, you won't have to worry about childcare when you start your new place," he said. "That sounds great, but I don't want us to be a burden to you," I said doubtfully. "Then who's a burden?" Mom said, smiling. Mom said, smiling. Mom said, smiling. She laughed. "Not Sam. And if it makes you feel better, you can pay us to stay here. It's all settled now." All that's left is for you to call your lawyer and make sure everything's okay. The next morning, I got up early to drive back to the state. As soon as I got home, I called my attorney. I explained to him that I had gotten a job offer out of town and wanted to make sure it was okay to accept. He said he didn't think there would be a problem if I didn't leave the state. I called Don Fineout and accepted his offer. We quickly agreed on a start date, and that night at work, I submitted my 2 weeks' notice of resignation. After my shift, Trev and I stopped by Gino's for a beer. The realization that this was the end of an era for us was taking hold of us more and more. The next week, he was starting an internship at a third plant across town. The rest of the week, I started packing. Jack called me every few days to see how Samantha was doing. He and Brenda were disappointed that she was still up north. But I talked to my mom about it, and she insisted that Brenda call her. My mom and dad, Jack and Brenda, had always gotten along great, and Mom wanted them to come up north and see their granddaughter. That cheered them up a bit. Donna came. Donna never came with them, probably because of a court order. Whenever Jack called, he wanted to tell me about the Donna situation. I usually let him go on for a few minutes, but then always cut him off when he got to the point that Donna missed Sam and me and wanted to talk. I told him that I was going to wait until my attorney and the court settled things. Donna even wrote me a letter, which I returned unopened. The turmoil still made it difficult for me to eat and sleep, and I periodically questioned my decisions and actions. I didn't want to be reminded of this any more than necessary. After Jack and Brenda took her home from the county jail after our altercation, Donna didn't leave her room for days. She alternately cried and slept, not even going out to eat. Brenda finally dragged her outside and insisted that she answer her attorney's calls, and the hospital suspended her without pay while it conducted its own investigation. Today, when he called and I listened to the obligatory information about Donna, I told him about my plans to move. He was quiet for a few minutes and finally said, "I guess this really is the end. I think we were still hoping you two could get past this." "No, Jack, I already told you that's not going to happen," I said quietly. "It's going to lead to Donna ending up even farther down the toilet," he said in frustration. "It can't be helped, Jack," said I simply. It was kinder than saying, "I really don't care" about Donna's mental health. I told him I was getting ready to move, but I didn't know what to do with the furniture. There were only a couple things I wanted to keep. The rest I decided to leave to Donna. After talking for a while, I realized it was unlikely she would ever come back to the house we were renting, so I offered to put everything in storage and pay the first 3 months' rent. Jack decided it was for the best. The next 10 days flew by pretty quickly. I was back up north for Memorial Day weekend. Sam was in all her glory, with my brother John, his wife, and 2 kids living in the house. Sam only went out to see the neighbors a couple of times. Casey's parents and her brother Jason were visiting Harvey for the weekend, and they were very busy. I never got to talk to Casey, and I only saw her from afar when she was at the lake. During my last week at the plant, I only worked 2 days and took 3 days off. I took a couple guys from my department, including Trev, and we moved everything in a day. I met up with Jack to give him the keys to the warehouse and some boxes of Donna's stuff that I had sorted through that I thought she might need. On my last day in town, I met with my attorney to discuss a few things. Donna had finally gotten in touch with the divorce attorney who had called him. She still insisted that she didn't want a divorce and wanted to try marriage counseling. I firmly told him no and told him to proceed. On Friday, I packed up the pickup and trailer with the last of my belongings, gave the keys to the landlord, and left town. As I drove farther and farther away, it was like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders. I felt like I'd finally put everything behind me and everything was going to be okay again. Sam was overjoyed that I was staying. She chatted nonstop for almost an hour. First, she asked about Mom and if she missed her, then about Grandpa Brenda and Grandpa Jack, who had come to visit earlier in the week. Finally, she fell silent, talking about boat rides with Casey and Casey, teaching her to swim. Later, when she went to bed, I asked my mom about her fascination with Casey. and whether Casey was really interested in spending so much time with her. Mom paused for a moment and smiled. I really think Casey thinks Sam is the most wonderful child she's ever met. Casey really is a sweet girl. I was so exhausted that night that I slept until 9 in the morning. Mom was bustling around the kitchen and told me that Sam had left with Dad and Harvey to go to the hardware store. She wanted to make me breakfast, but I refused. I said I wanted to go for a run first. One of my goals is to get back to running. It was about 5 miles around the lake, which was a little hard for me in my current condition, but I decided to give it a try. After almost an hour, I staggered into the house, sweating profusely from the morning sun and happy to have made it all the way without stopping. I put on my swim trunks, grabbed a towel, and walked out the front door to the lake. Throwing the towel on the sand, I walked over to the water and dove in. I surfaced, gasping and oohing and eyeing from the temperature of the lake. I took a few paddles, going in deeper, and just floated on my back, trying to ignore the cold. I heard hooting and hollering coming from Harvey's pontoon tied to his dock next door. I looked over and saw my mom, Sam, and another woman I assumed was Casey pointing at me and laughing. I walked back to shore, grabbed a towel, and quickly dried myself off. Putting the towel around my neck, I walked out onto Harvey's dock and down to his pontoon. Sam jumped off the boat, ran up to me, and gave me a hug. "Oh, Daddy, you were so funny." She giggled. "I'm glad I was able to entertain you all." I smiled at her and we all laughed. Sam took my hand and pulled me onto the pontoon. Daddy, this is Casey. She's teaching me how to swim and everything." She was practically ecstatic. I looked at Casey and smiled. "Hey, Casey. It's good to see you again. It's been a few years. Thank you for spending time with Sam. It means a lot to me." Casey looked me straight in the eye and gave me what I thought was a 100-watt smile. It had been years since anyone, male or female, had made such an instant impression on me. "It's my privilege, Ken. Sam is such a wonderful girl. We just have such a great time together." I couldn't agree more, but we can't have Sam hearing us talk about her like that. We can't let it get to her head, can we? I smiled at Sam and stroked her head as she giggled. While Casey talked, I scrutinized her, trying not to show it too obviously. She was wearing a two-piece swimsuit, not quite a bikini, but close. She was about 180 centimeters tall and had the build of a swimmer. She was well built, but couldn't have weighed more than a tenner. She had all the curves in all the right places. Her brown hair was cut short. Her skin had a healthy tint to it, like those who spend a lot of time outdoors. And her hazel eyes practically sparkled looking at me. I glanced at my mom, who didn't say anything, but smiled at me understandingly. "Okay, Mom," I thought to myself. "You just stay out of it." "Now that you've had your run and swim, would you like some breakfast?" She laughed. "That would be great. Everyone else has already eaten?" I asked. "You were the only lazy one this morning. Come on, you can catch up with those two later," she said, jumping off the boat. As I followed my mom down the dock, I turned around to Sam and Casey, and I thought Casey was watching me. "Are you staying here, Sam?" I asked. Casey seemed to blush, but laughed. "We'll just be here for a while. She'll be fine." As I followed my mom into the house, she looked at me with an edge of her eye and said, "Well, what are you thinking?" "About what?" said I, trying to play dumb. "Don't tell me that. I saw the look on your face when she smiled at you, and you immediately smiled back. You can't fool me. I've been around this block a few times before," she said knowingly. Okay, I can't say I didn't like what I saw. But aren't you getting a little ahead of yourself, Mom? It's only been a month or so." "You know," I said unconvincingly. She replied grimly, "Not if it's really over. And I know you. Once you make up your mind, there's no going back." Besides, Brenda and I talked when she and Jack were here last week. Donna finally came clean and told her the whole creepy story. And Brenda told me some of the things you didn't want me to know. I can't imagine you taking her back after that. Mom flinched when she said that. Not knowing what to say back, I just shrugged. Well, I can't imagine rushing into another woman either. It must take some time to get over it. Besides, who would be interested in a single father who couldn't keep his wife from cheating? I said bitterly, voicing my fears and insecurities. Mom stopped, turned around, and looked me seriously in the face. Now, Ken, put those thoughts out of your head. You've met your problems like a man, made tough decisions, and taken responsibility for your daughter. Anyone can see that. Your father and I are proud of you. Harvey and Casey know about your divorce, couldn't hide the fact that you and Sam came here to live without Donna. As for anyone being interested in you, have you looked in the mirror lately? Caught off guard by her outburst, I just shook my head. You should. I bet you've lost 10 pounds in the last couple months. You've always been in shape, but you're not wearing an ounce of extra fat right now as far as I can tell. And you've never been ugly. Your face has become more shapely and there are enough wrinkles to make you look quite mature. With your education, experience, and prospects, you're a godsend. Oh, Mom, you're my mom. You have to say it, said I, looking down at the floor in embarrassment. Go get changed and I'll make you breakfast. She let me go. The rest of the weekend went by without incident. I helped Dad and Harvey with a project in the garage and did a little fishing with Sam. Sunday night, Jack called to talk to Mom and Dad about coming over to see Samantha again. After talking to him for a few minutes, Mom handed me the phone and said, Jack wants to talk to you. Hi, Jack. How's Brenda? I asked. She's better. Thanks for asking. I wanted to ask you something. I gave Donna the card that Sam sent for her. She said to tell you to say thank you, but she'd like you to write her back. I know the restraining order is still in effect, but would you mind? I thought for a moment. Finally, I said slowly, I think it would be okay, Jack. As long as Donna pretends to be sick and goes to the doctor and doesn't write anything about us getting back together or make promises she can't keep. I heard Jack exhale noisily into the tube and said, Thank you, Ken. You have no idea how much this means to us and to her. And the pretense about her being in treatment isn't that far from the truth. Last week, we finally sent her to counseling for depression. We're really concerned for her safety. No problem, Jack, I said awkwardly. Well, we'll be there tomorrow afternoon. Your mom asked us to stay the night, so maybe we can talk some more. Yeah, sure, I said without enthusiasm, and we hung up. The next day, I headed to the county center to start my new job. For the first few hours, my boss drove me around the county, introducing me to everyone, including the road commissioner and several members of the road commission board. After that, he paired me with another engineer, and we drove all over the county reviewing current and proposed road projects so I could get my bearings. By the time I got home, I was pleasantly exhausted. When I walked in the door, Mom, Dad, Jack, and Brenda were sitting in the living room. Samantha was sprawled out on Brenda's lap, resting her face against her chest and clutching what looked like several sheets of writing paper in her hands. Brenda stroked her hair and whispered something in her ear. Sam looked up when she heard me come in, and I could see tears streaming down her cheeks. Daddy! Daddy! Mommy wrote me a letter. See? And she held out the paper for me to peruse. That's so sweet, honey. What did she write? Said I softly. Smoothing the papers in her hands, she said, Mom said that she loves me and misses me more than anything in the world, that she's been sick, but she's getting better and she wants to come visit me. Can I, Daddy, can I? And she looked at me pleadingly with eyes glistening with unshed tears. I glanced at everyone else in the room and realized they were all emotionally affected by Sam's reaction. Mom and Dad were trying to nonchalantly wipe the tears from their eyes. I looked at Sam again, took her in my arms and said, As soon as she's better, we'll make sure she comes and sees you, okay? Okay. I'll save her letter in my notebook and Grandma Bren will help me write a letter back. That's a great idea, Sam, said I. Mom stood up and said, Dinner is almost ready. Go get changed, Ken. That night after dinner, Sam went to bed. The four of us sat at the kitchen table. Jack said, "Are you serious, Ken? What you said to Sam? About visiting?" A little defensively, I replied. About visiting? Yeah, that's what I meant. I know I can't separate them. And if Donna recovers, I'll agree to whatever the court advises. But as for custody, I want to make it clear that I will never give up custody of Samantha. Not after what she's done. I will do everything in my power to make sure that never happens. Everyone. Make sure Donna realizes that. Brenda patted my hand and said, "Thanks, Ken. Visits are all she can count on. Sam is better off with you right now. We all understand that. Seeing Sam will help Donna recover." I relaxed a little when Brenda said that. My biggest fear was that someone would try to take her away from me. Jack said that Donna had asked her divorce attorney to ask the court to grant her visitation rights, but he said it would be better if she settled the criminal cases first. In the morning, Donna met with her criminal defense attorney, who recommended that she take a plea bargain to get the charges resolved as quickly as possible. Her attorney had already been in contact with the prosecutor and was told that a plea bargain was possible. The prosecutor was mainly interested in the two men, and the case against the women was considered relatively minor. In fact, Jack and Brenda were expecting to make a deal by the end of the week. I was a little concerned about how quickly things were moving, but I tried not to show it. I hoped that it would be a few more months of relative calm before I had to interact with Donna again. But for Sam's sake, I knew I had to put my doubts and underlying rage behind me. When I got home from work the next day, Jack and Brenda were already gone. Sam was at the lakeside with Casey. Mom informed me that Harvey and Casey would be joining us for dinner, so if I wanted a quick swim, I'd make it in time. I quickly changed my clothes, ran to the lake, and jumped in the water. I swam a few times down and back in front of the house and climbed out. Casey and Sam were busy doing something in Harvey's pontoon and weren't paying attention to me, so I went back to the house to change. That night, the five of us had a great time. We talked about finishing school and finding new jobs. Harvey bragged to Casey, and Mom and Dad bragged to me. Every once in a while, Casey and I would meet eyes and smile, and each time, I could feel the electricity. Then one of us would quickly look away and start a conversation with someone else. Eventually, the evening ended, and it was time for Sam to go to bed. Casey gave Sam a big hug and kiss, after which she and Harvey headed home. Over the next few weeks, this became a regular occurrence. Several nights during the week, we all had dinner together. We alternated between Harvey's house and our house. Harvey didn't really like to cook, but Casey seemed to enjoy it. Often we would barbecue, which Harvey and Dad enjoyed competing in. Weekends were busy with family or friends coming to visit us. My brother and his family were regular guests, as you would expect. One weekend, Trev and Vicky, who was now his fiancée, came over for the weekend. Apparently, Trev had had an epiphany and decided he didn't want to live alone. They seemed very happy together, and Vicky really liked Sam. I got the idea that they were going to have children in the future, and somehow Sam got the opportunity to introduce Casey to them before the weekend was over. The Sunday before they left, Trev and I were able to talk privately. He'd had work days since he'd started his internship, so he and Vicky had already been back to Black and Tan a few times. He quickly brought me up to speed. No one had seen Donna at the club, but Connie had. She started seeing James again when she and Curtis made bail. But Curtis was only out for a few days, and he was arrested again. It seems he had an argument with his soon-to-be ex-wife over suspicions that she had ratted him out. The police were called and charged him with assault and battery. His bail was revoked, and it looked like he was going to have to stay in jail. Jack and Brenda came every week to see Sam. The following week, after our conversation about Donna wanting to write Sam, Jack told us that Donna would plead guilty to 1 count of drug possession. In exchange, as a first-time offender, she will receive probation, 1 year of probation, and be required to complete a drug treatment program. In addition, she will face a fine and 200 hours of community service. She also had to cooperate in testifying against James and Curtis. She was fired from the hospital and was now looking for a job. Due to court fees, fines, and legal fees, Donna was broke, and Jack and Brenda were trying their best to help her. A few days later, my attorney called to inform me that a divorce hearing had been scheduled. Donna's attorney called him and told him that all she was asking for was regular visitation. She agrees not to file for custody and to accept the furniture and money I left in our accounts as equitable distribution. My attorney said that given her track record, he's confident we can insist on supervised visitation. If I didn't want to contest it, I wouldn't even have to attend the hearing. I agreed, and he assured me that a final agreement could be reached within a couple weeks. In the evening, Mom and Dad left to play cards with friends on the other side of the lake, and I put Sam to bed. I walked down to the lake, sat on Mom's big wooden swing, and stared at the water and the night sky, thinking about the divorce and what would happen when the dating started. As I sat there, I heard someone approaching from the next room. I looked up and saw Casey. "Hey, Ken, you could use some company?" she said cheerfully. Cheerfully, she said, "Hi, Casey. Not sure if I'm company, but have a seat." I moved over and made room for her on the swing. We sat in silence for a few minutes, and I was acutely aware of her presence. Finally, she asked softly, "Is something bothering you, Ken?" For a few minutes, I hesitated, pondering what to say. It looks like Sam's mother is going to be allowed to visit him soon, and I don't know how to react to that, I said in a shaky voice. Casey put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Your mother told me a little bit about your divorce. Would you like to talk about it?" I opened up to her, telling her what had happened and the aftermath. I found that reliving it with her again wasn't as painful as I had feared. Casey, for her part, was sympathetic, shocked and angry at the way Donna had behaved. She certainly didn't make me feel bad about it. After an hour or two of talking, I was exhausted. Casey held my hand and whispered encouraging words to me. About that time, we heard voices coming from the side of the house. Mom and Dad were coming home. Casey leaned over to me and kissed me on the lips. "Be strong, Ken. Everything will work out." She jumped off the swing and ran back to the neighbor's house. Surprised and stunned by her kiss, I got up and walked back to the house. In the days that followed, it became a habit that every couple of evenings late at night, we would meet at the swings or at one of the pontoons to sit and talk. From that point on, summer became magical. Work was fun and interesting, and Casey and I spent almost every evening and weekend together, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. A few times a week, Casey joined me on my runs around the lake. It was best when the three of us, Casey, Sam, and I, did something together. Sometimes Casey wanted to ski, and she would talk me into driving the boat, and Sam would be the observer, giggling and laughing at Casey, who would wave and clown around on one ski. Sometimes we'd take a slow ride on the pontoon at dusk, or just stroll around the lake holding hands. True to his word, my attorney called a couple weeks later to inform me that we had entered into a tentative child custody agreement. The divorce would be finalized within 60 days after we both signed it. Donna will be granted 1 4-hour supervised visitation per week at her expense. It would be her responsibility to coordinate it. About a week later, I received a call from the friendly court social worker asking for an appointment for the first visit. With some trepidation, I agreed to the following Sunday from 2 to 6. The social worker was to come to pick up Sam along with Donna. Donna asked if her parents could attend too, and I, of course, agreed. That evening, when Sam went to bed, I sat down with her on the edge of the bed to try to explain some things to her. She was very excited when I told her that Mommy was coming to pick her up on Sunday afternoon. "Daddy, is Mommy picking you up too?" she said, panting. "No, honey, just you, Mommy. Grandma Bren and Grandpa Jack will be together." Sam fell silent and tears came to her eyes. She said, "Daddy, don't you want to see Mommy?" Slowly, I said, "Sam, you know when Mommy got sick, we decided that she needed to stay with Grandma Bren and Grandpa Jack until she got better. And you and I are going to live with Grandma and Grandpa here at the lake and start my new job." Sam looked at him doubtfully, but replied, "Uh-huh." Since then, Mom and Dad have decided that we're not going to live together anymore. Sometimes adults do that. If they have kids, they still love them as much as they used to and still take care of them together. Sam started to cry softly and I hugged her tightly, trying to keep the tears from running down my cheeks. Now, Sam, you can see your mom every week, and as she gets better and you get older, you can see her more and more often. If that's what you want, okay? Sam pulled away and looked at me with her chin quivering. You mean when I turn 5? I'll be able to see her all the time? I got into bed with her, and we talked until she finally calmed down and fell asleep. I slipped out of bed and went into the living room where Mom and Dad were watching TV and reading. Mom looked at me carefully and asked, "How did it go?" "Better than I expected, I think. She seems to have come to terms with it. I don't know how she'll feel when she sees Donna. I'll call Jack tomorrow and have him explain to Donna what I told Sam." "Why don't you tell Donna yourself?" she asked, looking at me intently. "I'm not ready for that yet," I admitted. "You'll have to talk to her sometime," she said. I sighed. "Yeah, I know." I was silent for a few minutes, deep in thought. "I'm going to go down to the lake for a few minutes." Mom looked at me understandingly. "Tell Casey I really enjoyed the cherry pie she made for dessert last night." I looked over and Mom and Dad grinned at me. Sure, if I see her," I said. "Son, everyone on this side of the lake knows you two are dating except you," Dad said, laughing at my obvious discomfort. He added, "Relax, Ken. No one, including Harvey and Casey's parents, mind." "You two look at each other like you're the last sip of water in the middle of the desert," said Mom. And I could feel myself blushing and didn't know what to say back. "Now run along, dear. She's too nice a girl to keep her waiting long," said Mom critically. I turned and walked out the door, feeling somewhat foolish. Was it really that obvious? The fact that I was in a relationship scared me. Admitting that I was in a relationship scared me even more. But I had to admit that Casey was special. When I thought about her, I didn't know whether to come or go. I walked down to the lake and approached a dark figure standing by a large maple tree near the water. As I approached, Casey reached out and took my hand in hers. "What took you so long, Ken?" she said with concern in her voice. I had to explain to Sam about her mother and me, about us not living together anymore and what it meant to her. I stayed in bed with her until she fell asleep. "Donna is coming to visit her on Sunday," I added. Casey hugged me and looked into my eyes. "Sam is a strong girl, and she has you. She'll find a way to accept that," she said and kissed me gently on the lips. I pulled away slightly and smiled mischievously at her. "Mom and Dad just informed me that you and I are dating, and I'm the only one who won't admit it. Is that true?" "It's about time. Grandpa kept grumbling that you must have brain damage or something." She laughed. "Casey, I'm sorry if I disappointed you, but it's only been a couple months since my marriage went to hell. I'm not sure about anything anymore." "Well, I am sure of it. And as long as one of us is okay, that will be enough. I've wanted to take this relationship to the next level for a long time." "Are you sure, Casey?" I asked anxiously. "Ken, I've been in relationships before. Some have ended well, some have ended badly. No matter how they ended, they still hurt. But this is the first time I feel like I've fallen in love. I've talked about it before and told myself I wouldn't." She pulled away and looked at me apprehensively. I reached out and took her hands in mine. "Casey, I've been trying not to admit to myself how I feel about you. I know I want you badly. And yet I'm afraid. My track record with women has suffered greatly, as has my self-esteem since my marriage ended. Can you understand that?" Casey put her arms around me and rested her head on my shoulder, and I pulled her tightly against me. "Yes, I do understand. I hate that woman for what she did to you. But all women aren't like that. Let me show you, please?" "Casey, I'm not sure of anything except that I don't want to lose you. Let's plan something together Friday night. Just the two of us, okay?" She smiled at me in the moonlight. "It's a date and a promise." The next night, I told my mom that I wanted to take Casey out on a real date Friday night, just the two of us, and could she take care of Sam for me? She just laughed and said sure. I told her I was thinking of going to the Blue Grill on the other side of the lake. It was a car ride there, but they also had docks for boaters. I wondered if we should take the pontoon, since it would be a warm and clear night. Friday night at dusk, I went in to pick up Casey. She was wearing a sleeveless summer dress that emphasized her figure and contrasted with her tanned arms and legs. We drove slowly and quietly along the calm lake in the light of the setting sun. We talked quietly and enjoyed each other's company. Dinner was a leisurely affair, locally fried fish and a couple glasses of wine. We talked about all sorts of things: Sam, college, my job, and its prospects. She confessed that she'd fallen in love with Sam before I'd even moved north. She hadn't thought about motherhood until then. And then she said she'd met me again and suddenly found that her thoughts had taken a completely bizarre turn. I laughed embarrassedly and changed the subject. I commented on how strange it was that she still hadn't been successful in her job search. She laughed, reached across the table, took my hand and said, "Ken, I've already turned down several job interviews with the state of Detroit. I hope you're not angry?" Embarrassed, all I could say was, "No, of course not. I just don't want to leave here right now. Can you understand that?" she said sincerely. "Ah, I understand." We looked into each other's eyes and smiled. Nothing more needed to be said. After eating dinner around 9, we went back to the pontoon, turned on the running lights, and pulled away from the dock. Casey stood next to me as I got behind the wheel. She leaned over to me and said quietly, "Let's stop at the sandbar, okay?" Without answering, I turned the boat toward the dark shore of the lake. Sandbar was a misnomer. It was actually a sandbar protruding into the lake about 40 to 50 yards from an undeveloped stretch of shore. The lake was shallow and sandy for 20 to 30 yards on all sides. It was a favorite spot for boaters, where they anchored their boats and had picnics and parties during the day. Some summer nights, people would gather there, build a fire, drink beer, and have fun. There was enough starlight to swim across the lake and out onto the sand. I shut off the engine as the pontoons creaked along the bottom. I dropped the bow anchor on the spit. The air was calm, and the lake was like glass, so there was little chance the boat would float. I sat down next to Casey, she put her arm around me, and we kissed. The next day was Saturday. Casey's mom, dad, and brother came to the house for the weekend while we were out the night before. She was going to spend most of the day with them, so we didn't get a chance to see them. Sunday came and Sam was beyond excited to see her mother. I, on the other hand, was depressed, wondering how the visit would turn out. Shortly before 2, I heard a car pull up, and a few minutes later I heard Jack yell, "Hello!" as he entered the house. I went to the back door, and Jack was standing there with a middle-aged woman I had never seen before. "Ken, this is Mrs. Christensen. She's from the Traverse County Courthouse. She'll be overseeing the visitation." I said hello, and we shook hands. Mrs. Christensen explained that her role was to observe and report on the visitation, and to make sure they were taking place in a safe and healthy environment. She would report all her observations to me and the court. I just nodded and assured her that I didn't think there would be any problems. Jack said that Donna had better wait in the car, and Brenda was with her. They planned to take Sam to the county park and have a picnic. Afterward, they would drop Sam off and drive back home. I just nodded and said I would pick Sam up. I walked out to the front yard and yelled down to the lake, "Sam, Sam, Grandpa Jack's here!" Sam dashed out of the sand where she had been playing with her mom and ran down the path toward the house. Grandpa Jack, is Mommy here? Is she here?" "Of course she is, Sam. She's in the car with Grandma," said Jack. We slowly followed Sam as she ran out the back door and watched. 30 feet away, we could see the side of the car at the edge of the garage. I saw Donna get out of the car and kneel down to catch Sam as she flew into her arms screaming, "Mommy!" Donna grabbed her and stood up in one motion, wrapping her arms around Sam's neck and her legs around her waist, squeezing her as hard as she could. Donna looked up at me, and I saw a glint of tears in her eyes. She seemed to whisper the words, "Thank you," to me. Feeling my eyes burning, I turned away and said to Jack and Mrs. Christensen, "Have a good visit. I'll see you around 6." They nodded and headed to the car to leave. I walked back to the house where Dad and Mom had already returned from the lake. I felt incomplete and worried about Sam's departure. Mom and Dad assured me that there was no reason to worry. Sam would come back and everything would be fine. I just nodded and stared out the window. Thought you might be interested to know that we're invited to a barbecue this afternoon with Harvey, Casey, her parents, and Jason. I thought meeting Casey would cheer you up, said Mom. I smiled at her and replied, "Thanks, Mom, that would be great." Later, as we walked up to Harvey's patio to meet everyone, Casey walked over to me, took my hand, and kissed me on the lips. I looked up and saw everyone looking at us and smirking. "What?" I said, blushing my face. "Looks like someone came to their senses this week. Where was I when it happened?" Harvey chuckled, and Casey's mom and dad laughed with him. "Grandpa, Mom, Dad, now behave yourselves or we'll take the boat out and leave you behind," said Casey sternly. "Here, you two, have a beer and relax," said Harvey nonchalantly. Everyone laughed and we sat down to enjoy our food and a couple beers. It took my mind off Sam, but Casey could tell I was worried. Close to 6, I bowed out and went back to our house to wait. I heard a car pull up and I was already waiting at the door when Jack and Mrs. Christensen walked up to us. I walked out of the door and saw Donna standing by the car holding Sam in her arms and speaking softly. Mr. Colville, Mrs. Colville had a wonderful time with her daughter. She was affectionate and loving. I didn't notice anything objectionable, no attitude or behavior that would cause concern. It was obvious that they both miss each other very much, and I will recommend that the court allow them to continue seeing each other, said Mrs. Christensen. I nodded. "I understand and thank you," said I with some relief. "Thank you, Ken. Seeing Sam will really help Donna," said Jack. "Of course, Jack. When would you like to schedule the next visit?" asked I. Jack felt awkward for a moment. "Well, Ken, we're not sure. You see, watching Mrs. Christensen is expensive. And with all her legal fees, Donna doesn't have much money, and she hasn't found another job yet. So we're helping her as much as we can afford," he said. "Oh, I'm sorry. I never thought about that," said I. I looked back at Donna and Sam. They were talking, smiling, and completely engrossed in each other. Immersed in thought, I forgot about Jack and Mrs. Christensen until Jack cleared his throat and said, "Well, Ken, I think we should get going." Making a quick decision, I said, "Wait a minute, Jack. Mrs. Christensen, would you mind if I asked my attorney to remove the formal supervision clause from the custody agreement? I mean, I'd be perfectly comfortable with Jack and Brenda taking responsibility for being present for any visits." "No objections," she said. "And you're willing to do that, Jack?" said I. "Of course, Ken. And thank you. That would be a big help." Jack said this with a broad smile on his face and shook my hand enthusiastically. "I'll call him tomorrow and ask him to do it." With those words, the two of them walked back to the car. Donna gave Sam one last hug and kiss and sat her down on the ground. Sam ran down the driveway. "Daddy, Daddy, Mommy got me a new Barbie. She has a swimsuit, and I can play with her by the water." And she held out her latest acquisition for my approval. I made all appropriate remarks and took her hand as she turned and waved goodbye to Donna, Jack, and Brenda. A few days later, Jack called again. He thanked me warmly for removing the supervision and said they would like to return Friday afternoon. I replied that I was fine with that. I no longer felt I needed to be there when they took Sam. Jack hesitated for a moment, then slowly said, "Ken, I know you've refused to do this in the past, but Donna would like to talk to you. It's very important. Her counselor says that in order to get healthy, she needs to talk to the people she's hurt." My first reaction was anger, and I started to automatically say no. But then I remembered my mom's words that eventually I would have to talk to her. And then I thought about Casey. I knew that I would have to put it behind me to move on with my life, and I felt like I knew where I wanted to go. I exhaled slowly and said, "Okay, Jack, what are you guys up to?" We decided that Friday night, after her visit with Sam, we would spend the night at the Doherty Hotel. Donna was hoping you would meet her at the hotel restaurant and have dinner. He said hopefully. "Okay, I get home from work around 5:30. I can meet her at 7. Will that work?" Jack sighed. "Yeah, thanks, Ken." I hung up, trying not to let the feeling of dread overwhelm me. That night, sitting in the swing and hugging Casey, I hesitated to tell her I was dating Donna. Finally, I blurted it out. She took it calmly, but I could tell it alarmed her. She assured me without much conviction that she was okay with it. After some discussion, she went home earlier than usual. I decided to go to bed and try to forget about it. Friday, I got home from work, and Sam was already home from Donna's. While my mom watched this, she sat on my lap and happily talked about everything. Finally, when she was done, she said, "Can I go in the next room now and play with Casey?" I replied, "Sure." Mom commented, "Sam and Donna reunited quickly, didn't they?" I just nodded. Mom hesitated for a moment and they said, "Does that bother Casey? Your reunion with Donna, I mean. She's been very quiet the last couple days." I guess she's not sure about me. After all, I was married to Donna for almost 6 years. I think she's afraid Donna will come back into my life, at least through Sam, said I sadly. Well, that's what you have to realize. You and Donna are going to have to maintain a relationship until Sam grows up. That's for sure. I just hummed and went to my room to change. I pulled into the Doherty's parking lot a few minutes before 7. I walked into the lobby and saw Donna standing at the entrance to the restaurant. She watched expressionlessly as I walked toward her. Stepping closer, I said, "Hi, Donna. You look good." "Thanks, Ken. I know I look better than I did a month ago, but you're the one who looks good. The tan suits you, and your face looks slimmer. It makes you look more grown up," she said, studying my face. "Yeah, but I spend a lot of time outdoors for work and at the lake too," said I awkwardly. Donna actually looked thin, too thin. She was pale and you could see crow's feet around her eyes. Her clothes, hair, and makeup were carefully chosen. It was obvious she was trying to keep herself in check. "Should we get a table?" I asked. "Sure, I made a reservation for us," she said nervously. We didn't talk about anything else until we were seated at a table, and the waitress put a menu in front of us. We talked a little about Sam and my new job while we ordered. I ordered a salad and coffee since my appetite was pretty much gone. Donna didn't seem to be in the mood either, and ordered soup and salad with hot tea. As we talked, I saw Donna gradually relax, realizing that I wasn't going to verbally attack her. After we seemed to have exhausted our supply of small talk, Donna cleared her throat and said in a low voice as she studied the table setting, "Ken, I want to thank you. Thank you for a few things. Thanks for taking off the supervision of Sam. And thanks for giving Dad the money for my bail. I was such a burden to him and Mom. I know I'll never be able to repay them or you. But most of all, thank you for taking care of Samantha. At least she had one parent who cared for her." Feeling awkward, I tried to change the subject. "What are your plans now, Donna?" Without answering the question, she continued, "I know Dad told you that I've been going to psychological counseling for some time now. I graduated from a substance abuse program and did community service at a women and children's shelter as part of my sentence. I've also gone back to attending our old church and am in counseling with one of the pastors." She looked up at me for the first time since we sat down at the table. "It's important to me that you know how much I've changed." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "The last thing you asked me when you left me in prison was, why? My therapist says that in order to move on with my life, I have to answer that question. I guess there is no unequivocal answer. It was a combination of drugs and alcohol, and something is wrong with me. All I can do is explain how it happened and hope you can forgive me." Tears ran down her cheeks and she wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. Donna, you don't need to explain anything. It's in the past now, said I. No, I have to explain. Shit. I promised myself I wouldn't, she said, pulling herself together. Our food was brought to us and we both sat in silence, picking at it. Eventually, we put it aside and just sat with coffee and tea. Donna sat with a sad expression on her face and looked out the window. Finally, she turned to me and said, "Please let me get this over with, okay?" After our big fight about my first date with Connie, I thought things were fine between us. But then, Connie started calling every couple days, wanting to do it all over again. I kept telling her no, but she kept insisting, saying I deserved some time to myself. After all, I'm the one stuck at home with Sam every night. After a couple weeks, she started coming into the house after Sam went to bed. I'd open a bottle of wine and we'd talk. She talked about going to clubs, about music and dancing, about the men she met. She said it was so much fun. The second time she was at my place, she lit up a joint and tried to talk me into taking a drag, but I wouldn't. The next time she came over, she took another drag, and this time, I didn't refuse. She sighed. You were immersed in your studies, trying to get your degree, and you were still working 6 nights a week. We didn't spend much time together because of my schedule and yours. When you did have time, it seemed like Sam was more important to you than me. With Connie's help, I convinced myself that you were ignoring me, and I deserved some time to myself. Every time Connie came over, we'd have a couple glasses of wine and get high. The next time she suggested we go out, I agreed. The following Friday, we went to the bus stop. There were some guys sitting at a table next to us, and one of them came over when we sat down. It was James. He and Connie dated from time to time, which I didn't find out until later. I also found out later that Connie had called him and told him we would be there. James introduced Curtis to us, and the four of us sat down together. We danced, talked, had a few drinks, and it was fun. Curtis and James were attractive, funny, and danced well. But nothing more happened, and we headed home. The following Friday, we went to the bus stop and met up with James and Curtis again. After a couple hours, James suggested we go to Black and Tan to hear some real music. I was reluctant at first, but after a few glasses of wine and a joint, they convinced me it would be okay. Connie and I got a lot of attention that night. I realized later that Curtis was starting to act possessive. He would put his arm around me, hold my hand, make sure I only danced with him, and kind of keep the other guys away. James and Connie excused themselves to the car for a while. When they came back, Connie's face was flushed and she was giggling the whole time. Later, when Connie drove me home, I told her I wasn't sure I should be doing this. She assured me that it was just good fun. She repeated this to me several more times during the week when she stopped by my place. The next time we were going out, Connie said that James and Curtis wanted us to meet them at Black and Tan. Since we had been there before, I agreed. The guys met us at the door and led us through the crowd. Later, we sat in the back seat listening to the radio and talking. Anyway, it felt so good. After that, I got hooked. I was living 2 lives. My life with you and Sam was nice and safe. You loved me. The other life was wild and crazy and dangerous. I knew I could never let you know about it. I also knew I needed to stop, but I kept telling myself, one more week. I knew I was being crazy and irrational, and I suspected that Curtis and James were doing something illegal, but I ignored it. Anything to keep the thrill going. So that night, Curtis and James drove us to the hotel. And then the police burst through the door, and my life was over. She hesitated and looked at me stoically. You know the rest of the story. When you came to the police station and showed me the pictures, you held a mirror up to my eyes. I saw what the rest of the world saw, what I had become. You called me a whore, and you were. I wanted you to make things right, but you were the one I hurt the most. I ruined everything and everyone in my life. But you and Sam, the 2 people I love most in the world, got hurt the most. We sat in silence, contemplating what had happened. I didn't want to ask any questions. She had filled in the blanks perfectly enough as it was. Finally, she raised her eyes to me. Ken, you asked me what my plans are now. I guess that's up to you. She hesitated for a few moments. Do we have any chance, Ken? Is there any chance you'll forgive me for what I did and try to rebuild our family? She said pleadingly. I sat in silence. Somehow I knew that if we were together, this moment would surely come. I had once loved this woman more than anyone else in the world. She had given me the most precious gift a man could receive, our daughter. But the images and knowledge of those events can never be erased. The only thing that could tempt me was the fear of being alone. But now I knew I wasn't alone. And if she accepted me, I would never be alone again. Donna, it's not about me forgiving you. It's about whether you can forgive yourself. As far as we're concerned, I shook my head. There's no turning back for me. With tears in her eyes, she asked, Is there someone else, Ken? I nodded. I think so. At least I hope so. Is it Casey? She said sadly. I nodded silently. Sam talks about her all the time. She's happy girl, she said wistfully. I got up to leave. I couldn't wait to get home. Donna gathered her purse and we walked out into the hall. She turned around and looked at me. Thank you, Ken, for talking to me. She kissed me on the cheek and walked toward the elevators. I turned and headed for the car without looking back. Now I knew what I wanted out of life. When I walked into the house, Mom, Dad, and Casey were sitting at the dining room table. There were crayons and a few of Sam's coloring books scattered around the table. Mom said, You've been gone longer than I thought, Ken. Sam just went to bed. I'm sure she's still up if you want to say goodnight to her. In a minute, Mom, I said, looking at Casey. I must have looked pretty grim as I walked through the door. Casey's face suddenly had a look of concern on it. I'm going to go. You three probably want to talk, she said, getting up. I took her hand and pulled her back to the chair. I sat down next to her and didn't let go. No, Casey. You're the one I want to talk to right now. Now I know exactly what I want in my future. Looking into her eyes, I said, Casey, knowing what I've been through and what marriage means to me, and if Sam approves, will you marry me? Casey suddenly turned pale and her mouth was open in a big O. I saw Mom cover her mouth with her hands and tears came to her eyes. And Dad just smirked to outplay the band. But, was all Casey could get out. Oh, and Casey, I love you. I've known that for a long time, but I couldn't say it until now. Casey put her arms around my neck and said in my ear, Oh, Ken, yes, I want to marry you more than anything in the world. Mom was openly crying, and Dad was hugging her and still smiling. Casey pulled away and looked at him anxiously. But what about Sam? What if she doesn't want me? Well, let's go and find out. I lifted her to her feet and headed down the hall to Sam's room. I knocked on Sam's door and said, Sam? It's Daddy. Daddy, did you come to kiss me goodnight? She said sleepily. No, Sam, Casey and I want to talk to you, okay? We walked into her room and I turned on the bedside lamp. Sam sat up, blinked, and said, Okay. Casey and I sat on the edge of her bed and I took Sam's hand. Sam, would you mind if Casey and I got married? That means the three of us will be living together and Casey will be your second mom. Sam looked at the two of us triumphantly and said, Are we always going to live together? I'd like that. She then asked anxiously, What about Mom? Mom would still be your first mom, Sam, and you would still see her as much as you want. But Casey would be your second mom. Sam thought about that for a moment. But if she's going to be my second mom, I won't be able to call her Casey anymore, she said pitifully. Would you want to call me Casey's mom, Sam? Asked Casey quietly. Casey's mom? Casey's mom. Okay, I'll call you Casey's mom, said Sam cheerfully. so Sam did. Over the next few months, however, Casey's mom eventually became just mom. The divorce was finalized about 6 weeks later. 2 months after that, we were married in a small ceremony at a local Methodist church, just in time for Mom and Dad to leave for Florida before the first snow. Trevor was my best man, and Sam, of course, was our flower girl. Seeing Casey and her dad follow Sam down the aisle was amazing. I found a house for us that was on a hill that overlooked Grand Traverse Bay. We moved there right after we got married. It was in that house that we experienced our first winter in northern Michigan. I am convinced that Casey got pregnant in front of the fireplace one cold, snowy night. Casey insisted on going off the pill a month before the wedding, something about the promise she'd made to Sam. I didn't bother asking for details. Casey went to work at Munson Medical Center and occasionally worked part-time at the local veterans hospital. But she had to quit after a year when her pregnancy made it hard for her to get around. Jack and Brenda got tired of driving to Sam's every week, so they moved north, 30 miles away. According to Jack, this suited everyone as they were 2 hours closer to their other grandchildren in UP. Donna decided to stay with them and help care for her mother. She eventually found a job with a cardiac specialist group in the area. She and Sam see each other a couple times a week, and sometimes Sam stays for the weekend. Donna and I don't socialize much, but I've heard that she meets occasionally. My brooding state was broken by someone calling my name. I looked up. My mom and dad, Casey's mom and dad, and Harvey were piled in the doorway of the hospital room. "Hold these babies and let me take a picture of all of you," pleaded Daddy. "Hold on, Dad." "Sam, you're sitting right here in front of me," said Casey. We placed one curl each in Sam's arms, and Casey and I leaned on her shoulders, helping her support the babies, and smiled into the camera. This photo of the 5 of us and Sam shining into the camera has a place of honor on our mantle. Every time I look at this photo, it reminds me that I am the luckiest person on earth. The end. If you haven't watched the first part, be sure to watch it. The link will be in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.